Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Post Up with David Grubb on this Thursday. I, of course, am David Grubb right here on Boo Crew Media. And a few things to go through. And before we get started, just a couple of sort of things that have been going on today. Because, sometimes you go ahead and put your rundown in, you know what you're going to talk about, but then things happen. So you got to update and deal with that. So the rumor continues that the Pelicans are really trying to be aggressive in moving up in this draft. And I don't know how much of this is posturing on the part of the Pelicans or just trying to get the move that they want. But I think you've seen, us talk about this before on Booker Media, where we've given our ideas about whether or not the Pelicans should move up. And I talked about this a little bit on Tuesday as well. It is my belief that unless the Pelicans are moving up to number two, and there's been some talks that that's the ultimate target is to get to the second spot. If you're not moving up to two, my thought is why move up at all? Because no matter whom any of us really likes, whether the player is Con Kneppel, whether that player is Trey Johnson, whether that player is Common Malawak, whomever you like, Derek Queen, whatever, whomever you like, there's a second or third player too you have in that order. That player is likely going to be available to the Pelicans at 7. Now, if you're moving up, I think you watch the draft and you pay attention to how things are breaking. And if the player that you want, if the draft order starts to change and people are jumping up and taking the players you want, then you may want to make that move. But I think giving up any assets preemptively to try to jump up, unless you're getting to 2, then I've said this and I'll say it again. I think that between 3 and 11, the value for any of those players is pretty much the same. And if you are moving up to take one of these players, what you are signaling is that you consider that person a vital piece moving forward. A vital piece moving forward. It's one thing to move back. And I think that ultimately, I think that is the better choice for the Pelicans to me is if you move back and you're getting more picks to move back, okay. But to me, or if you're adding picks, if you're picking up a second pick in the first round, or you're picking up second rounders in a draft that should have some interesting second round targets, which we've also talked about in the past, and you can go visit those episodes and see those targets potentially in the second round. If you're doing that, then fine, I get it. But to me, at this point, and I don't mind the Pelicans researching, and I don't mind them getting the word out that they are interested in making moves because they have moves they need to make. The team has to get better. But again, before we move into the meat and bones here, I would say that I just don't think the Pelicans should move up and give up assets in order to move up. If you're getting too cool, if you're staying in between 3 and 7, why give up assets? Why pay more when you're still going to get the player that you probably a player that you could probably utilize from day one in this draft? I don't see the point in doing that. But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If the Pelicans go up there and they grab somebody and they come in their perfect fit, I'll be wrong. And I have no problem with that. Ultimately, you want the Pelicans to be better. And if moving up makes them better, then do it. But I just at this stage, I don't see the value ultimately in the Pelicans trying to move up and grab another player in this draft. Whether it's Ace Bailey or whomever, I just don't see that value there, particularly with an Ace Bailey who seems to be falling in the draft. All right, the first thing we want to talk about, and you see like the headline underneath is how to raise a rookie, and just talking about the draft just now, and then just thinking about some of the things that have occurred with the Pelicans over the years, and how hard it's been for this franchise to develop young players. And we could go back over the history of this franchise and see that it's been very difficult at times. We've already talked about the failures of the Pelicans just selecting and developing players during the Chris Paul era, how they failed to turn lottery picks or first round picks into consistent contributors. And that really hurt. You had very few lottery picks, obviously, during the Anthony Davis years. Pelicans gave away a lot of first round picks. But the few first rounders that you did have, most of those didn't pan out, whether you're talking about your Austin Rivers and something like that. I think you had 3 first rounders during the Anthony Davis era that you could have picked from. And outside, like Buddy Hield didn't make it to his second contract, right? With the Pelicans, he's traded for DeMarcus Cousins. Austin Rivers didn't make it to a second contract with the Pelicans in the draft that he was taken in. So you really didn't have a lot of success. You've not had a lot of success in taking lottery picks or first rounders in general as the New Orleans Pelicans. And I think what brings this stuff to a head again in multiple ways is once again the criticisms levied by Dyson Daniels have come to the forefront. There was another article about Dyson Daniels, and you know his story. Obviously, he was drafted 8th by the Pelicans in 2022. You could see why they took him at that time, though there are players that certainly have been better who were drafted after him, who have had better careers so far. But last year, Dyson kind of came into his own, won most improved player this offseason, was named to the all defensive team, led the NBA in steals. But one thing that's been consistent for him, and it started about in December of last year, was his criticism of his tenure with the New Orleans Pelicans. 2 years in New Orleans after he was drafted. And he was discussing again that there wasn't really a vision for him, how to be utilized as a young player. And I think that when you look at this, particularly as we look at the Willie Green era, because you only had 2 years before that, and your rookies at that point, I think there was a failure certainly in understanding what to do with some of those guys in those first 2 years. There wasn't really a plan for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. There wasn't really a plan for Jackson Hayes. There wasn't really a plan for Kyra Lewis, and I think that stuff has kind of persisted since then. You've had, particularly under Willie Green, you've had a failure, I think, in identifying what rookies do well and allowing them the opportunity to have some success. The rookies who have gotten playing time under Willie Green, and even you could say for the Pelicans under the last 6 years or so, the rookies that have gotten their play time is because you had to play them. If we're talking about Jackson Hayes, he got to play because Derek Favors was hurt, and the Pelicans didn't have anybody else to turn to, so they played Jackson Hayes. When you look at Herb Jones coming in and getting to play because Zion Williamson was injured and they needed somebody to start, and Herb Jones, off the strength of his summer league play, he wasn't supposed to be starting, obviously, but was thrust into that position and got a bunch of minutes. This past season, what happens to Yves Missi in his rookie year if the Pelicans don't enter the season with no veteran centers outside of Daniel Tice? Does Yves Missi get the opportunity to grow on the court and play if those things don't occur? You could go the year before and talk about Jordan Hawkins, and if he got the right opportunities, though I would say Jordan hasn't earned those on the court, but just the plan for him. Go to Trey Murphy and talk about him in his rookie year and how it just didn't seem like Willie Green knew what to do with him. He got sent down to Birmingham to figure his game out and then came back, and it still took a while for him to get the minutes that he deserved as a first round pick and as somebody who brought a skill set that the Pelicans needed as an outside shooter. There seems to be a problem with the Pelicans in just identifying a plan of growth for young players. And this for a team that has consistently had a number of first and second year players on its roster. Developing those young players, when we talk about, I don't think it's just for small market teams, but it's for teams in general. If you're constantly not hitting on your first round picks or they're taking longer to develop than you would like, you are forced then to make moves to deal with that. You may take on a veteran that you don't necessarily want because you're not getting the kind of production that you need out of the players you've taken. And I think the Pelicans, if you're going to continue to invest in young players, which they are always going to have to do because of the position that they're in, and you're never going to be a free agent destination, you're never going to be the kind of team that can just throw all kinds of money at players to have them come to New Orleans, and you've not done the kind of winning that attracts free agents for lesser value. If you're always going to be in the position of having to develop young players, then you better have a plan on how to develop them. And one of the things that seems to have been a disconnect with the Pelicans over the years is how do you utilize Birmingham in the G League to make sure your players are getting the kind of development that they need? And I don't blame this on Birmingham. You do what the big club tells you to do. but there seems to be a disconnect in how to utilize Birmingham when you're going to utilize Birmingham. And certainly injuries play a part in that. But we've seen young players sitting on the bench while other players have been injured and not getting minutes. And I give you Antonio Reeves an example that he was sitting on the bench idling while the Pelicans couldn't find shooting in the backcourt. There doesn't seem to be a strong enough plan. And I think that going forward, the Pelicans really need to figure that out if they want to be successful. What are you going to do to focus on player development and growth while still trying to win basketball games? Look at the Indiana Pacers and their development of players like Nimhard, of players like Benedict Mathurin, and all these guys who have come up and started to perform for them on the biggest stage. It's because the team trusted them at times, and they've still been able to grow and compete because they put the right veterans in place and trusted their rookies and young players to grow and develop. The Pelicans have to get in that mindset if they're ever going to reach their potential. They've got to allow their rookies to fail. They've got to allow their young players to fail while still building a culture of winning. How do they do that? That's not my job to figure that out. But again, there has to be alignment between the top of the organization and every level down to the towel people, to the guys who do the laundry. Everybody's got to be in alignment of what the purpose is here. And every rookie, when they walk through the door after they've been drafted or signed or whatever, the Pelicans need to be putting together a file, a plan of what they're going to do for that player. What are the milestones that they want to see as far as minutes? What are the milestones you want to see as development? What skills need to be improved? If you're not seeing those things and setting those plans together, player and coaching staff, fitness team, all those things. If everybody's not working together to achieve those goals, then you're not going to get them. So I think that's something that the Pelicans have to be looking at going towards the future. We continue to see speculation about deals as they come into this offseason and what teams may be able to do. And one of the things that has been talked about is a major 4-team trade. The Knicks certainly are at the centerpiece of this trade. This is a Knicks Kevin Durant deal, first and foremost. And you understand that the Knicks are going through their changes. They're kind of discovering that their two best players in Karl-Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson don't play best together. So what does that have to do with the Pelicans? In this deal, what you're seeing here is that the Pelicans would receive Karl-Anthony Towns from the Knicks. The Knicks would get Kevin Durant. The Washington Wizards would get PJ Tucker from the Knicks and a 2027 first-round pick, which would be the Pelicans' swap option with the Milwaukee Bucks with that top 4 protection. That would go to Washington. And then the Phoenix Suns would get a haul of DeJounte Murray, Yves Missi, Kelly Olynyk. That's to make the contracts work. And then the 2026 first-round pick via Washington, the swap rights there in that pick, a 2026 first-round pick, the top 4 protected pick from Indiana that the Pelicans already own, a 2026 first-rounder that the Pelicans currently own, that is their pick, which would be top 9 protected, and then a 2028 first-round swap, which would be the least favorable of picks between Brooklyn, New York, and Phoenix coming from the Knicks, and finally a 2031 first-round pick from the Pelicans that they got in the Brandon Ingram trade from Toronto. Now, when I look at that deal, the players going out are not a problem for me. Losing DeJounte Murray and Kelly Olynyk to give up and Yves Missi to get Karl-Anthony Towns as far as talent goes, okay. But giving up all of these picks, the Pelicans losing 4 picks in this deal for Karl-Anthony Towns, I'm not sure if I'm willing to do that if I'm the Pelicans. And this is why I say this, and Karl-Anthony Towns is a fine player, but Karl-Anthony Towns was the centerpiece in Minnesota before Anthony Edwards got there. And you didn't see his ability to lead that team to winning as the number 1 option. Anthony Edwards had to come along and assume that role. There had always been the problem that we've heard from about Karl-Anthony Towns' leadership and his ability to win basketball games as the best player for a franchise. In New York, again, Karl-Anthony Towns is a fine player, but there were issues in the postseason about when he would take charge. He tends to live on the perimeter rather than dominate on the inside when he can. His shooting ability, yes, he's in contention for that title of best shooting big man ever. He's a guy who consistently flirts with 50, 40, 90 every year. That's a 6'11", 7-foot player. That is a rare quantity to have. You're talking about two guys in that, two of the greatest big men shooters of all time. We talk about Kevin Durant and Karl-Anthony Towns being moved in this deal. And I get why it works for the Knicks if you're going all in again. Kevin Durant maybe fits you a little bit better in efficiency and just in temperament. Maybe that's what you want. I get why the Knicks would do it. I get why the Wizards would do it. The Wizards don't lose much at all, right? They get a first round swap. They don't have much as far as problems in this deal at all. But I get why the Suns would do it because they're getting a buttload of picks. But if you're the Pelicans, for the amount of money that it takes for Karl-Anthony Towns, I think that's a bad deal. I think you're giving up way too much in that circumstance for a player that doesn't necessarily raise your floor or raise your ceiling high enough to make himself worth it. Even if he's an all-star every year, are you not just getting back into the same situation for a lesser defensive player than you were with Anthony Davis? Right? You're still in a position where you got to build this team out. And how are you winning with Karl Towns? Do you have enough defenders to make it work with Karl-Anthony Towns? Do you have a dynamic wing player? And you're counting on Trey Murphy then, I would assume, to be that guy for you. You're putting the ball in Trey's hands on the perimeter because it doesn't work with Cat, Zion, and Trey. That doesn't work to me. Though I think, you have Cat on the perimeter, fine, and he's stretching the floor for you, and that's opening up things for Zion. And in that regard, it makes sense, and you're saying by style of play, but I think on the defensive end, you're giving up so much as far as like the flexibility to improve your team by taking on that huge Karl-Anthony Towns contract. And then just his mindset. Are you winning with Karl-Anthony Towns? Are you entertaining? Sure, you probably are entertaining if you trade for Karl-Anthony Towns, but are you winning? And I think if you're making moves to get those kind of expensive players, then you better be getting somebody who you know is going to help you win at a high level. And I don't think Towns brings you to the top of the Western Conference. And I think ultimately, because of the cost of that, you're talking about just your three-man group right there of Zion, Cat, and Trey. That's incredibly expensive. And two teams have already made the decision, essentially, that if you're getting Karl Towns, what two teams have told you is that he's too expensive. Minnesota moved him because he was too expensive. The Knicks are moving him because he's really expensive and doesn't fit. So if you're the Pelicans, why do you want to be the next team to take on a guy that other teams are telling you is too expensive and is hard to play with to get the right fit in order to be a winning team? I think that would be a mistake ultimately for the New Orleans Pelicans. One of the other questions that I've gotten is that if Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to stay in Milwaukee, are the Bucks picks worth keeping for the New Orleans Pelicans? And I would say once you know for certain if the deal is done that Giannis is not going to leave Milwaukee, then you need to use those picks to get rid of DeJounte Murray. If you got to pay the tax to get DeJounte Murray off the team in order to get that flexibility and improve and go forward, then that's what those picks are for now. Because they're not going to be great picks. They're going to be first-round picks, but they're consistently going to be at the low end of the first round because no matter what, Giannis is going to put the Bucks in position to be a playoff team. So if those picks don't have the same value, then you need to use them to get something to improve your team, and you'll still have your own first-round picks. So take those Bucks picks and utilize them to get off of bad contracts that you have on your roster. And I think the one bad contract you're looking at right now is the contract of DeJounte Murray. So to me, it's only worth keeping those Bucks picks if you had control of the Bucks. And if the Bucks now are sticking with Giannis, they're going to try to build somehow around him. So I think once there's a confirmation, once there's an understanding that if the Bucks come out publicly and say the trade talks are dead, he's staying. Once that's done, then those picks lose their value, and it's time to move off of them and try to find a better way to utilize them. And I think paying the tax in that regard, and I put that in quotations, it's just the way I call it, is paying the tax to get DeJounte Murray onto another team and maybe take back a better asset. If not getting any picks back in exchange for him, maybe you're getting second round picks. Maybe you're getting, the financial flexibility is good enough. But whatever it is, I think it's in the Pelicans' best interest at this point to move off of DeJounte Murray and get a player who can help them immediately rather than having to wait for his rehab and hope that he fits in when he returns. I don't think that the probability is there that he's going to be that guy going forward. I didn't see him as a fit before he came to New Orleans, and it seems like that fit has just gotten worse since he started playing. I mean, it was a pretty much open conversation throughout the season that DeJounte, before he got hurt, that DeJounte was just struggling in every facet of the game. Turnovers, shooting, all those things we've already discussed. So I think if you're using your picks to move DeJounte and find that point guard of the future, if you're drafting that point guard in this draft, if you're finding them somewhere else, then I think that it's the best thing to do is ultimately move on from DeJounte Murray. All right, finally, before we go, BB and KP, we're talking about Bruce Brown and Kristaps Porzingis. According to Evan Sidery, the Pelicans are still looking for potential partners in a sign and trade for Bruce Brown. Contending teams that are looking for wing depth might be interested in him. LA and Denver have been consistently mentioned as possible destinations for him. Of course, he played 23 games for the Pels last year, made 12 starts, averaged 8 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, shot 41% from the field, 35% from three, had 9 games where he scored in double figures. If you can get something for Bruce Brown and you can make that sign and trade work, fine, but I don't think that should be a priority. Obviously, you want to get something for a player who is a free agent, and so the Pelicans would like to have the opportunity to get something back in exchange for Bruce. But if the deal isn't there, it isn't there. Don't try to force something and take back something you don't need. But I think if you can make the deal, fine. But it looks like the Pelicans are still trying to see if there's a taker that will give them something in exchange for Bruce Brown. I think the reason that that's probably more likely with the Lakers or with Denver is because of their financial situations and they have to give up assets in order to bring in Bruce at the money that he wants. So what are you willing to take back from either Denver or the Lakers in exchange? I think that matters as far as to where his contract goes. He made $21 million last year. I don't see either Denver or LA paying him $21 million. So you're trying to find a happy medium, and who then are you looking to take, and what are these teams trying to give up? If you're getting back short-term contracts that at multiple positions, then I think that may be worth your while because at least you're giving your roster some depth and you have options of what to do with those players. I don't know if there's any veteran talent that when you look at either one of those teams that you're really super interested in taking back that you think could jump ahead of the players you already have on your roster or make a significant contribution to you. So I think if you're dealing with a cash-strapped team, then the sign and trade makes sense to help them out in order to get something in return, or even if that's the flexibility of getting some picks that maybe down the road, sure, let's do that. But if Bruce Brown can help facilitate that, then go ahead and make those deals. We'll see what the business ultimately dictates. There are more and more reports that the Celtics are open to keeping Kristaps Porzingis, but he has been mentioned as a trade candidate for the Pelicans by multiple sources. In a proposed deal, the Pels would get Kristaps Porzingis, and I actually kind of like this deal. It makes a lot of sense. The Pels would get Kristaps Porzingis and Jaden Hardy. Hardy is with the Dallas Mavericks currently. Dallas would get C.J. McCollum and the 28th pick in this year's draft from Boston. The Celtics would get P.J. Washington and Daniel Gafford to replenish their front line because Al Horford may not be returning. You're trading out Kristaps Porzingis. They get P.J. Washington to play the 4 while Jason Tatum is out. You get Daniel Gafford to give you minutes at the center position. If you are able to re-sign Horford, he can still play the backup, or he can start for you as he did for the Mavericks while Derek Lively and Anthony Davis were out. The Pelicans get Porzingis in this deal, so you get Porzingis at 29 years old and who's owed $30.7 million going into the final year of his contract. 42 games last season. Yes, he's had a lot of injuries because when you look since 2022-23, he's only averaging 53.8 games per season. Last season, he played 42 games, but in those minutes, he put up great numbers. 29 minutes, 19.5 points, 6.8 rebounds, 1.5 blocks, and he shot 41% from three. He's averaged 37.2% since 2022 from three-point range. I think that if you're taking that risk on a one-year deal and you're getting a player who can stretch the floor, and this is much different than the Karl-Anthony Towns deal, because you're still getting great shooting from Porzingis when he's available, and certainly that's a concern. And he had an injury-plagued season and was injured in the playoffs as well. But if you're getting a Porzingis for, again, his final year of his deal, the final year of his deal. So what you're getting is that center, in the meantime, a stopgap solution who can be your back line of defense. Gives you something different than Yves Missi. So you limit his minutes. You limit Porzingis' minutes because of the injury concerns. And now you've got a two-man platoon at center with Porzingis and Missi. You start Porzingis because you give deference to the veteran who's also a better defender than Missi. But that changeup, you give them each 6 minutes a quarter. And you throw in some other players in the mix. But if you're thinking 24 minutes a night, he played 29 minutes last season. So if we're looking at 29 minutes, then if it's either 6 or 7 minutes per quarter. And you give Missi those other minutes, and you can platoon them. You can play them together sometimes. You can go double big lineup, put Porzingis at the 4, and let Missi play the 5 and see what you get there. I don't think that's a bad deal at all. And I think the sleeper part of that deal is getting Jaden Hardy. Because Jaden Hardy at 22 years old, will be 22 when the season starts next year. 6'4" shooting guard, second-round pick in 2022, but has shown that he can knock down shots. In 3 seasons with the Mavericks, he's averaging 8 points per game, but he's shooting 38% on threes on more than 3 attempts per game in his career. So if you're getting those two players, you're getting a player that you can use in Jaden Hardy off the bench, who started a few games here and there, but gives you a skill, again, that you are looking for in knockdown shooting from the perimeter. And Porzingis can be your bridge to help Yves Missi, allow him to continue to grow and not worry about a whole bunch of mistakes and things in his second season. If there's a second season regression, the sophomore slump, as they call it, if there's any of those things, you have a veteran who can do big numbers for you. You're not bringing in Daniel Tice, who you're hoping can provide you some stability. If Porzingis is even available for 50 to 60 games, you're still getting more than what you got out of the Pelicans center rotation. And again, you don't have to make a long-term commitment to him because he's in the final year of his deal, and you could still flip him at the trade deadline to a contender and get more back. So to me, a deal in this case for Porzingis makes sense. If you're able to get a deal like this and all you have to give up is CJ McCollum? That's all you're giving up in this deal? And the Mavericks get some shooting for the outside, and they get another pick in this draft, and all you had to give up was CJ McCollum to get back Kristaps Porzingis and Jaden Hardy? Then if I'm the Pelicans, I'm making that deal. To me, there's no question that I'm making that deal. I don't know about you guys. You give me your feedback in the comments below. I'd be glad to read it, to hear it. So give me your feedback as you get it. But that's going to be the show for today. Of course, tonight there's going to be a live show at 8 p.m. So go ahead and check that out. You can join us. We'll be talking about a lot of these topics and more. So go ahead and hit us up then. And make sure you check out all of our content here each and every day on Boot Crew Media. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe and put that notification bell so you don't miss anything. And you can find me on social media, as you know, at DM Grubb on Twitter and Instagram. And you can also find me on TikTok and Blue Sky. So until next week, I'll be back on Monday, of course. This has been the Post Up with David Grubb on Boot Crew Media. Y'all have a great day.